Many analyses are motivated by a researcher looking for a relationship between two or more variables. A social scientist may like to answer some of these questions. For instance, do counties with higher poverty rate receive more federal spending per capita? Well, that would be a numerical type of question, in that higher poverty rate is a numerical variable, and also federal spending per capita is a numerical variable. Which counties have a higher average income? Those that enact one or more smoking bans, or those that do not? So this would be a numerical categorical type of question, and that the average income is numerical, but whether or not the county has a smoking ban is categorical. Are women less likely to have health insurance than men? This would be a categorical type of variable question. Male, female, that's categorical, and health insurance or not, that's also categorical. For numerical questions, we can answer them by creating what's called a scatter plot. Scatter plots are one type of graph used to study the relationship between two numerical variables. For instance, the graph you see on the screen compares the federal spending per capita with the poverty rate for each of the 3,143 counties in the country. So you see that on the horizontal axis, poverty rate, the dots you see over on this side are the counties that have a relatively high poverty. The dots you see on the left side are the counties that have relatively low poverty. On the vertical axis is the federal spending per capita. So the dots down here receive relatively little federal spending. The dots up here tend to receive a lot of federal spending per capita. Each point on the plot represents a single county. So the one you see right here, that corresponds to Owsley County, Kentucky, which had a poverty rate of 41.5%. So go to the dot and scroll down to the horizontal axis, 41.5%. And from the dot, go to the vertical axis, you see that they get about $21.50 per capita. Now, not true in for every single dot, but in general, you should be seeing a sort of upwardness to this. Again, some dots are higher than others, but in general, you see this upwardness to it. The scatter plot suggests a relationship between the two variables. That counties with high poverty rate also tend to receive slightly more federal spending. Looking at this graph, you might want to try to brainstorm why this relationship exists and investigate each idea to determine the most reasonable explanation. The federal spending, when you see this upwardness to it, federal spending and poverty variables are said to be associated because the plot shows some kind of discernible pattern. Two variables that show some kind of connection with one another are called associated or dependent variables. And when you have this upwardness to it, this upward trend, we say that there is a positive association. So in this graph below, counties with higher poverty rates tend to receive more federal spending per capita. Likewise, graphs with a downward trend are said to be negatively associated. And the two variables are not associated, they are said to be independent. So this graph here on the far left, there's this upwardness to it. We call that positive correlation, positive association. Here is a negative correlation or negative association. And this third graph, just kind of a random swarm of dots, we call these independent. One variable has no effect on the other variable. Okay. The graph below shows a scatter plot of home ownership versus percent of units that are in multi-unit structures, like apartments or condos, for all 3,143 counties in the country. Are these variables associated? Now, if you're looking, to me anyway, this looks like a downwardness. So yes, to me these look associated. Looks like a negative association. So yes, the variables appear to have a negative association. The more people there are that live in a multi-unit structure, the less people there are that tend to own their own homes. One last thing before I call this lesson to an end. When you examine a scatter plot, keep track of the outliers. These are dots that seem to be away from the rest of the cloud of points. Sometimes outliers tend to be mistakes like typos, but sometimes they have stories to tell. So for instance, the one on the far right, well, that one turns out to be New York County. Not really surprised that in this case, almost everyone lives in a multi-unit structure. Not too many people own their own homes. The other one, this one down here, is one where no one owns homes. Only 20% of units are multi-unit structures. So that would mean that most people are living in homes, but they don't own it. This county is Kalawao County, Hawaii. As of the 2010 census, the population was 90. Kalawao County was a quarantine site for lepers until 1969, and no new permanent residents have been admitted since.